Now, there was no way that the Boston Tea Party was going to go unpunished. The Parliament and the Crown both looked at this as I said before, essentially a form of, that day's terrorism. And so Parliament passes what came to be known as the Intolerable Acts. Okay, now it was 1774, and by huge majorities. Okay, we're not talking about that it was close, that there was really a division, but we're talking about a landslide. Parliament passed a series of what were referred to as repressive acts in order to punish the colonies. Now, we say colonies, but in all honesty, it was really to punish Massachusetts. Massachusetts was where the most famous of the Tea Parties had occurred, and as such, they were also seen as essentially the cradle of this rebellion that seemed to be growing in the colonies. And the theory was if they could smash the rebellion there, if they could stamp out the smoldering wick, then it would be over and done with. Now, the British saw these as the repressive acts, but we tended to look at them more as the intolerable acts. They were so bad that they could not be tolerated. Now, one of the things that it was you had the Boston Port Act, which closed the harbor in Boston. Now, keep in mind, New England was primarily involved with shipping. Okay, the South was agricultural, and while there were farms and things like that in New England, mostly it dealt with shipping. And so if the port was closed, that meant no ships going out and no ships coming in. This was intended to cut off trade in regards to Boston and Massachusetts in general. The idea being, if their trade could be cut off, they would quickly come to heel and would apologize or what have you, and everything would go back to the way it had been before. Another thing that happened was that self government had been limited by forbidding town hall meetings without approval. Now, we don't really think a lot about city council type meetings today, but this is really one of the cornerstones for New England. For decades, centuries, that was the big thing that people got together at the town hall meeting. Now, to say that they were no longer allowed to meet to discuss the goings on and figuring out what to do on a local basis unless they got approval from the crown ahead of time. This was just really adding more and more fuel to that fire that we've already talked about. Thirdly, the Massachusetts charter was revoked. Now, the charter was essentially the permission from the king to exist as a colony. And if that charter was revoked, then it could be resubmitted, it could be looked at in different ways, it could be given to someone else, things like that. And so as a result, the idea was that they would be able to go through and again bring Massachusetts to heel. The idea behind all of this was to make Massachusetts and therefore the other colonies basically give up this concept of any kind of sedition or insurrection or whatever you want to call it. The drawback for the crown, however, was this tended to have exactly the opposite act. It made the patriots dig in their heels, and it made people who might have been just on the fence fall toward the patriot camp. In addition, you also had at this time something called the Quebec Act. Now, obviously, this had something to do with Quebec up in Canada. This was not a bad law. This was actually a moderately good idea. This was something pretty nice. But it came at the same time as all these intolerable acts. And so as a result, it really got lumped in with everything else and was looked unfavorably upon. Okay, it guaranteed the right to practice Catholicism to the French Canadians. It permitted them to retain their old customs, and it even extended the boundaries of Quebec all the way to the Ohio River. Now, generally speaking, not a bad idea, but the drawback is that you really have a lot of bad laws coming through at this time, and this one's going to get lumped in with them. In fact, the Americans saw their territory as being threatened by this law. They also saw an increase in anti-Catholic feeling. The anti-Catholics were shocked at the enlargement that would make a Catholic area in North America every bit as large as the original 13 colonies. Plus, Americans were banned from the region because of that proclamation line of 1763. So While the other acts were designed to punish Boston and the colonies, this one wasn't done so, but it ended up having the effect of enraging the colonists even more. It seemed like no matter what Parliament and the Crown did, it was going to make things worse.